Well, that got quiet real quick. Thank you, guys. I'd like to welcome you to our City Council, St. Cloud City Council workshop for this Thursday, April the 15th, 2021. We'll begin by having our roll call.
Mayor Blackwell?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Trace?
Here.
Councilmember Matheny?
Here.
Councilmember Cooper? Councilmember Askew?
Hi.
Here.
Here. Here. The first item on our agenda is the discussion in regarding mobility fees and our police, fire, and parks impact fees.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to have
Sturgeon?
our Finance Director, Wendy Collazo, introduce the consultant we used for this mobility fee, recreation, fire, and police impact fee.
Thank you. Wendy, the floor is yours.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, Wendy Collazo, Finance Director. Just to summarize for you, to begin hopefully the pace for the meeting, as you recall, the city sought out to get a comprehensive analysis done in the reference of mobility fees, park and rec, police department, public safety fees, and also a phase 2, which is the water and sewer fee analysis. The concept of it was to make sure that there's the proper recovery and allocation for expansion costs as we move forward and growth continues in the city of St. Cloud. Through meetings and partnership, the partnership has been a fantastic one with people such as Tony, who's the vice president, Joe Williams, Tony Harrison, just to give his last name, Joe Williams, and Jonathan Paul, who's the principal for New Urban Concepts. As you'll see moving forward, the presentation will go through each of these categories and identifying the calculations through the data that was submitted, as well as capital infrastructure needs, and a quick synopsis of everything. Keep mindful that this is a suggestion based on the data that was presented, so we could have a good brainstorming session on the results. The main objectives for this meeting will be to pay attention to growth, new growth, to make sure that it pays for itself. And then, of course, historical assets, making sure their embedded costs continue to be sustained. And finally, the third one is the compliance with Statute 163-31801. So without further ado, I will have Tony Harrison come up, and they will go through their presentation, and hope it's an enjoyable one. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Wendy.
Good afternoon. Tony Harrison, Vice President with Raftalis. And again, each of us are going to speak. With me is Joe Williams, who's a manager at Raftalis. He'll get up after Jonathan Paul. Who's over here. We'll talk about mobility fees. So we're going to go through each of those. I believe in your packet you have both the PowerPoint that I'll go through, which will be on the screen here in a minute, and you also have a technical report for the police, fire, and recreation. You do not have the technical report yet for the mobility fees. We're looking for a little more feedback before that technical report will be produced. But Jonathan's already provided some draft fees. I will say, and I'll take you through a little bit of background, and then in order, Jonathan and then Joe will go through some of the technical details. The PowerPoint hits pretty high level. So, when we get into the police, fire, and recreation, there's a lot of detail in the reports as well. For the mobility, which we'll do first, it's the most complicated fee area. The city has a lot of land uses. Mobility fees typically have a lot of land uses. Jonathan and us spent time with staff, kind of working through and right-sizing those land use categories. And I think we're in a pretty good place there. Would enjoy getting feedback there. But one of the other changes is that currently you have one fee schedule for the geographical area of the city, where what Jonathan's calculated is 3 separate geographical areas of the city that he'll walk you through. So that's a change there on those mobility fees that he's going to present. On the police, fire, and parks, the fees are a little less complicated in that you don't have all those different land uses. It's basically single-family residential, multifamily, and commercial for police and fire. And really the change there is we split commercial into 2 different entities. So there's a little bit of a nuance there on police and fire. On recreation, you don't charge recreation to commercial as is custom in Florida, not to charge to commercial because the impact's a little more tenuous. But in all of those police, fire, and parks, we do have recommended change in how the multifamily is calculated relative to the single family, and Joe will take us through that. And as Wendy mentioned, just here on these objectives is the objective is growth pays its own way. So that's the mantra throughout the study. And this involved not just new projects, but projects that the city's already maybe invested in that growth would buy into. So it's always a balance of buying into infrastructure that's there that has capacity for growth, but also especially new projects that have capacity for growth. But what we can't do is if the project's going to go be benefit for growth out to, say, 2040, we can't look out and charge it just to growth through 2030. We have to make sure it's proportional. That's one of the things there. Sometimes when you see the total costs that are in the impact fee are less than what's in the CIP, that's the reason why. It's just you're taking a portion of that cost and attributing it to growth. And importantly, we follow statutory parameters in case law. Do we have the presentation up? Okay, I'm just not seeing it. Okay. Okay. So that was slide 3. Just a couple more before I hand it over to Jonathan. And most of y'all will know, but just for the benefit of everyone in the audience, impact fees are one-time charges established to recover costs of infrastructure and capital equipment needed to accommodate demands and growth. They don't replace existing assets, or if you're replacing something that's fully utilized and it's just for the benefit of existing residents, we're careful not to have those type of infrastructure in the fee. And they don't correct deficiencies in level service. So if you have to bring up level service, a lot of times that benefits existing because by definition you're behind on the level service, but it could have a benefit to growth if part of that's oversized for growth. So we recognize that, but we don't want to recognize the deficiency part because you can't charge new growth to fix any deficiencies now. And they certainly do not fund operations or maintenance costs. That's a given. There's a House Bill 337 and a Senate Bill 750 in the state legislature right now that could further restrict the use of impact fees. There's been versions that, for example, police and fire, the kind of infrastructures in there is police stations, fire stations, and so forth, but also equipment. There was an earlier version that excluded equipment moving forward. Latest that we've seen this week, equipment is in there. There may be some capital, smaller capital that may get excluded when that bill finally makes its way into law or not. So we'll have to see. And we have to see what period of time if things do change there. But we certainly don't have any operations or maintenance. The other thing that we followed in the study is we don't have short-lived assets in there. We try to at least have 5-year assets, and that was another language that's in these the House bill and Senate bill. It's at least 5 years, so we generally try to follow that as well. There's also there's been different versions on that bill of how quickly cities can increase the impact fees. It was as low as 3%. There may be a version out there still as low as 3%, and no one's really quite sure what that means. Does it mean 3% for inflation without doing a study? Latest we've seen, there's versions that have, well, if it's 25% increase or 50% increase, the city has to phase it in. Again, just saying that, we don't really know where that's going to land. Every year it goes through a process, and where it ends up is maybe different than the path taken during the legislative session. So I just want to point that out as well. And finally, I will not read this to you, but some of the important dictates of statutes right now is Section 3A is most recently localized data. So we certainly use the city's most recent localized data. And down on F here is F and G are proportionality. It deals with what's called, you may have heard, the dual rational nexus test, which basically means that you design the fee on the costs in proportion to how properties are benefiting, growth is benefit from that. And the dual part is you use the revenue collected on those type of projects. So you just can't set a fee based on a cost and go use it for something else. Can't collect fire fees and use it for police or recreation or mobility. Is generally the way of viewing that dual rational nexus test. with that, we're going to start with the mobility fees, and I'll hand it over to Jonathan Paul, and then we'll get to the police, fire, and recreation after that.
Thank you very much, Tony. Can you all hear me okay with the mask on, or is it better without it?
I prefer it without, please,
Okay.
if you're comfortable doing that.
All right. My name is Jonathan Paul. I'm the principal of New Urban Concepts, and thank you for having us this afternoon. We are going to discuss mobility fees. And essentially, a mobility fee is similar to a roadway impact fee. The big difference is it can fund sidewalks, bike lanes, trails, paths, and potentially even transit vehicles or dedicated transit lanes. The fee that we're going to be discussing this afternoon is actually based on the projects identified in the city's mobility plan. One departure, Tony had mentioned it, that's from your current fee. Right now, your current mobility fee is citywide. It's the same amount whether you're downtown or you're out in the suburban part of the community. What we're proposing is actually it be lower in downtown, a little bit higher in some of your mixed-use developments or your special overlays as part of your future land use map, and then outside of those areas, it would be the full fee itself. We were also proposing streamlining some of the uses that are currently identified in the city's mobility fee schedule. And so the city, I guess about a year or two ago, sort of pre-COVID, went through a planning exercise and identified a number of multimodal improvements throughout the city. Sidewalks, bike lanes, new roads, trails throughout the community. And it was a fairly well-written report. It consolidated a lot of studies that the city's done over the years. So I sort of took it to the next step. And for each one of those projects, in order for you to actually be able to spend a fee on a multimodal improvement, you actually have to be able to demonstrate it adds capacity to the system. And in terms of capacity, we don't mean to move cars necessarily, but the ability to move somebody riding a bicycle, walking, or accessing transit. And then there are some projects similar to roadway lighting or intersection improvements. Those are sort of making the environment better to walk and bike, making it safer to do so. So as part of that enhanced capacity, those projects are also incorporated into the fee itself. So the only project that was excluded was the Turnpike and the Turnpike interchange. And those are largely excluded because those are funded by toll revenues. And we don't really capture trips going on that length. So in terms of the overall cost, that was the one project excluded from your mobility fee calculation. As I mentioned earlier, we are proposing a different approach to your fee, and staff likes the idea. We've kind of laid out a couple of different options. There's been some recent discussion on the Nolte Road corridor and whether or not you do or don't want to incentivize residential development versus non-residential. My original proposal was the area in red, and so that largely encompasses your historic grid and the 3 community redevelopment areas that are within the city. So essentially, any development within that area would pay the lowest fee. You know, and part of that is actually based on the fact it's more compact, you have a greater mixture of land uses, and people don't tend to take as far trips once they're within that area. One option, we've also sort of included the Nolte Road corridor in that. There's been some discussion about residential versus non-residential. I've actually had a similar discussion. I'm doing a mobility plan and mobility fee for the city of Port St. Lucie down in St. Lucie County right now. And they're trying to promote redevelopment along the US 1 corridor. Similar, it's a multi-lane arterial. It's a state road going through a portion of their older part of town, their community redevelopment areas. There's a couple of uses, you know, such as a car wash or a fast food that they wanted to make sure it was paying the full rate. And unfortunately, when you sort of designate an area, you can't pick and choose which land use gets a lower fee. One idea we threw out that the city is exploring is if you had different design standards, such that, you made non-residential front the street and have parking to the rear, or provided a higher level of pedestrian and bicycle improvements, then you may have a technical argument. But absent any change of design standard, if you are going to move forward with the Nolte Road corridor, in terms of the fee itself, you'd have to use the same methodology for non-residential and residential land uses. Staff had also mentioned you have a number of policies in your comprehensive plan today, both for existing and then future areas that annex in that are known as mixed-use developments. They have a mixture of office, retail, and residential uses. And then you also have special area overlays where you're trying to encourage a certain type of development pattern, compact, again, a different design standard. So we have a second category that includes both mixed-use development and special area overlay. And those aren't necessarily going to be mapped as part of this assessment area. They will follow, though, your future land use elements. So when a project comes in and they change their land use to a mixed use, they would then qualify. If they have a special area overlay established per your future land use element in your map, then they would qualify for that lower fee. The benefit district, Tony touched on this a little bit earlier. We are governed by what's known as a dual rational nexus test. So the first part is you've got to demonstrate need. This community has a lot of growth, both in terms of residential and employment, so the need wasn't that hard to justify. The benefit is it's the entity that pays it has to receive some type of mobility benefit. Doesn't have to be right in front of their house or right in front of their business, but they have to be able to freely use it. So the city currently has a single benefit district, which is citywide. We're proposing to maintain that. And part of that is about 5 years ago, I updated Osceola County's mobility fee. And so there's only 2 benefit districts in the entire county, east and west of the Turnpike. So, when you're looking at the size of the city, it's a fairly strong argument to say, if development down on Nolte Road pays a fee, you have flexibility to spend that along the 1792 corridor. Likewise, if you have a project that you want to prioritize somewhere else, you can use some of those monies citywide. Your city's compact enough that, during the week, anybody could reasonably use that infrastructure. So the mobility fee schedule itself, I'll be honest, I've tried to figure out your current schedule and your current fees. The factors, the discounts, all the different things into play. And even after having done this for 20 years now, it's been difficult for me to figure out. So I take a different approach whenever I'm doing fees. I try to make it as simple as possible. I try to make the land use fairly descriptive and the unit of measure fairly descriptive. So, I don't really rely, I rely on the technical basis to adjust the fees itself, as opposed to making it after the fact discount adjustment. So one thing that we are proposing, which is a little bit of a departure, is a residential rate per square foot. And so this really helps to address, to the extent you'd like to promote certain types of affordable housing or workforce housing. Essentially the way this works is if you come in for a 400 square foot micro apartment or a 1,000 square foot house, you pay for 1,000 square foot. If you pay for a $3,000 or $4,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 square foot house, you pay for 3,000 or 4,000 square feet. You pay the same dollar rate per square foot, but there's no tiers, there's no one size catch all. There's a direct correlation between the size of the house and the fee paid. One thing you may want to consider if you like that approach, and it does away with mobile homes, does away with single family, does away with multifamily. It's just, if you can live in it and it's defined by the Florida Building Code as a resident, that's what the fee is based on. And so it's relatively straightforward. Some communities have elected to establish a maximum cap, because in theory, you could have a 10,000 square foot house and you could require them to pay for 10,000 square feet. Some communities settle in between the 3,500 to 5,000 square foot range. Others, Miami Beach was one I recently did. whatever it is. Somebody comes in and builds a 20,000 square foot house, they can afford the fee, and they're going to pay per square foot. So again, that's sort of a policy level decision. We have a category for hotels, overnight lodging, and also one for, to the extent you have those. And I will make one caveat for the record here. Just because a use is shown on the schedule doesn't mean it's allowed in the land use element or the zoning. So the mobility fee basically says, if this type of use is allowed in this area, this is what you'd pay. So I'd just like to make that caveat. There are some folks that say, well, you have it listed on that use, and that means I can do it. No, it's just, if it's consistent with your comp plan, then you can do it. Similar, we've combined what I call community serving uses, which is your daycares, your places of worship, your lodges, your clubs, your private schools, all into a single category, sort of simplifies it and streamlines that from the multiple categories you have today. Likewise for long-term care, which is assisted living, congregate care, nursing home, they all have similar impacts. There's no need to, separate those out as further uses. Industrial, most communities like to streamline and promote industrial uses. So we've kind of included all industrial in one category. I'm not sure to the extent your communities experience it a lot. A lot of communities right now are being overrun by the self-storage units in the mini warehouses. So I've been asked from some areas to say, is there a way to fully capture their impact? Because now they're starting to store boats. Now they're starting to store RVs, and they're doing a lot of different things as opposed to just you have a personal good, you don't have room for your house, you store it over there. These things are getting bigger and bigger, and they're more prevalent. So this category sort of expands that type of warehouse. So if you're any type of storage use, you'd pay this rate. And that also is a conversion factor. If you're storing boats, you're storing RVs, you'd also pay for that as well. This category for outdoor recreation, whether it be tennis courts, golf course, go-kart, any of those type of uses outside, they just pay the same rate per acre. Likewise, if you're a gym, you're a trampoline park, you're a climbing wall, and you're indoors, you pay the same rate per square foot. For office uses, we've proposed two categories. General office, which is professional real estate, accountants, attorneys, engineers, and then medical office. So whether you're a dentist, you're a hospital, your emergency room, those are the two different types of office categories we have proposed. And I will point out one thing that we're also recommending. It's a little bit different of approach. Oftentimes you'd see uses shown per 1,000 square feet, but in reality the fee itself is calculated on a per square foot basis. And that's always caused a lot of confusion for the public. So all the schedules I've been working on, they're all moving to the per square foot. So that is one change that we're recommending. It's how it's actually calculated, and it's just better to actually show that up front. Commercial, there is a new category that we're proposing, and this is essentially for local retail uses. This would be a local mom and pop store, a local restaurant that's not a chain and it's not a franchise, but essentially if you have 5 or fewer locations statewide and you're not a chain, you're not a franchise, whether you're a restaurant, retail, personal service, you would actually qualify for the local retail rate, and their fee is roughly half of what it is for a chain retail use. That's a policy decision on your part. We've provided the technical basis to allow you to do that. Some communities like that approach. Others just say retail's retail. We're going to charge the same rate per square foot. So that is something, if you had some feedback. Most communities I've presented to, they've actually liked the idea. It's hard enough for local businesses to compete. So this is at least one opportunity to recognize that. The other factors that are somewhat new, and I like to call them the trip generating components of retail uses. So it's the drive-throughs for banks or the freestanding ATMs. It's the drive-through lanes for a Chick-fil-A. It's the number of fueling positions for a gas station. And I'll give you a real quick example on the quick service restaurant. I had a project which I also helped some communities doing development review on. It was a Taco Bell. And Taco Bells have historically been between 2,000 and 3,000 square foot in size, and they've had a single drive-through lane. Under this category, the building itself would fall under retail. So it would pay for 3,000 square feet. What's happening, part of it's COVID, part of it's a trend that was happening before. The building's 1,000 square foot, only has a walk-up window, has no indoor seating, and it has 3 drive-through lanes. So there's 2 lanes to pick up when you're ordering, and then another lane for delivery vehicles to pick up orders and then go to the houses. So what's starting to happen is the building itself really isn't what's generating the use. It's the drive-through lanes. And if you have a Chick-fil-A in your community or you have some of these uses there, you'll know pretty quickly what happens when they start adding, one, they have the additional lanes at first to help, but then when they find, all right, we can move more people, they actually generate more traffic. So a lot of trends are moving in that direction. Another one's, while we still all drive gasoline vehicles, and we probably will still for the next 10 to 15 years or so, there's a lot of uses from Dollar Generals to grocery stores now that are starting to offer fueling pumps, and they offer discount clubs and things like that. And whether you do or don't go through that store, you can get gas there. So, if you just tied that to a convenience store, you're missing out on quite a bit of impact. So this also separates out that type of generating use. And so with that, there's those categories. It's that process. I think any of the feedback we're looking for, and again, depending on, some comments from staff, some additional changes. If you like the idea of the 3 assessment areas, if you like the proposed schedule of uses that we have here, that's sort of the feedback we're looking at. I know it's a lot to digest just today. So, if there's comments you want to provide back to your staff and ask us to address, we'll be happy to do those. But if you have any questions, I'm free to answer them. And if not, I'll turn it over to Tony.
First of all, do we have any questions?
Ladies first.
Why y'all looking at me? I got some questions. I'll let Keith go first.
No, ladies first.
Councilmember Thiem.
Okay, thank you. I always say, I know it's harder to create something than to critique it.
Yes.
So one thing I did like was the single benefit district for sure. When I first started working at Osceola County, they had five impact fee districts, and it was a nightmare of like where the money was is not where the growth was, where the need was. It's like it divvied up the money in too many different sectors. So I know now it's like east and west of the turnpike,
Yes.
which is
Yep.
a lot
easier.
to utilize. So I'm a fan of the single benefit district. Okay, the size of the house, fee schedule. So one of the items that I had brought up to staff was that I didn't think we should be giving discounted rates to multifamily homes, which we were before.
Okay.
Because I was like, the same amount of people can live in a 3-room multifamily home just as a regular home. Like, I didn't like us giving that discount. So initially I was kind of like, yeah, I like the size of the house schedule. But then I wondered, I also don't want to disincentivize building large houses. Like, that's one thing we don't have a lot of is like the larger tracts where they build, 3 homes to the acre instead of 18 homes to the acre, So I feel like, are we going to disincentivize having larger homes by doing it per square foot? That was just my concern with that. I know when we did when I first got on council, like 5 years ago, now almost, we had given a discount to commercial because we don't have much commercial development here, and so to try to incentivize commercial, we discounted it, and thinking that it really doesn't make much of an impact in our budget because we don't have anybody building commercial. So, that was one thing. With this new schedule regime, I don't really know how it compares back to our old schedule, Like, what are these rates, when you work these rates out and put them in the same format as our old rates, like, how do we compare with the city of Kissimmee or Osceola County? I don't know, because people, developers will play a game with us where they'll develop in the county, they'll go get all their plans and do all that stuff, and then later they want to annex into the city, but then the mobility fee, it's like they try to go like who has cheaper.
I'll say these fees are way lower than the county's.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
not way lower, but, they're based on the programs identified in your project. So these fees are lower than the county. Are they lower than your current fees? That's something I'm actually trying to figure out with your staff. 'Cause again, I'll be honest with you, I've had difficulty trying to figure out what fee actually somebody has to pay for
Yeah.
your commercial today.
because for me, I would like us to be in line, and I don't know all the magic that goes into this, but I would like to be more in line with the county, just so people don't play the game of
Okay.
trying to, use one of us against the other one. Because we have a large JPA.
You do.
And
You
so
absolutely
then
do.
people, it happens to us all the time. It's like they come to us to annex, but they already, had done all their development in the county. I wasn't sure with this scenario, again, 5 years ago, we were told not to adopt the mobility fees at 100% because that opens the door for people to come nitpick your analysis and to like adopt them at a lower rate, which we did based on the recommendation of the consultant at the time. We'd since
Right.
brought them up, but at the time, that was, so is the intention to adopt these at 100%?
So what happens there, the previous consultant, what they do is what's known as a consumption-based fee. So it's just based on a theoretical capacity of a road and the cost of that road. Here, it's actually based on your improvements. So you have a specific list of improvements identified in your mobility plan. We associated a specific capacity with those. So in terms of a nexus, I don't worry about it because if somebody wants to figure out how it's calculated, here's the list of projects it's based on, here's the capacities it's assigned, here's the fee. So every fee that I personally do, I only do plan-based fees. I only base it on something real and tangible, because then you know, one, what you're actually basing it on, two, you actually know what it's likely going to be spent on as well. So in that respect, you don't need to discount. And it's always, these fees couldn't go higher without a technical basis, but you as elected officials can always lower them. So that's always your prerogative. But in terms of the way I calculate fees, I calculate them at the full impact, and I don't recommend any type of reduction. If you want to reduce it, what I would suggest is you identify additional funding for your mobility plan projects as a technical way to do it, as opposed to just making an arbitrary number.
Oh, I don't want to reduce them. I don't want to reduce them. So then that begs the question is, I know at the city, we don't have a transportation and transit department. We don't have a traffic engineer unless we've hired one recently. We don't have, so do we have a robust of a list of future projects as we should have? Because if that's what's driving
Oh, no, you do.
the mobility fee.
Yeah, your city's mobility plan is actually really well put together.
Okay.
It's a fairly comprehensive plan. This community's done a lot of studies from what I've looked at over the last 10-plus years, and that mobility plan did a really good job consolidating them. So personally, I think you have a pretty robust list of both roadway projects, trails, and sidewalk projects.
Okay. Another comment I had was, which I love, the idea of letting a mom and pop restaurant have a different mobility fee than, an Olive Garden or a McDonald's. I love that idea. But then, of course, the cynic in me goes, what happened, can they play a game and say it's going to be a local mom and pop, and then they go through all this stuff, and 3 months later, it's like they're out and in is, like, how do you prevent something like that from happening? Or if the use changes, so it just kind of struck me, like, when we were talking about, like, what if somebody, says it's gonna be something with a lower mobility fee, and then a year later they switch the use, do we get another crack at the mobility fees at that point?
So depending on how your process is structured in terms of change of use, if they have to come in and ask you to change it, then yes, you would have the means to assess them a higher fee. If they're basically going from one use to another and they don't need to do an interior build out, they don't need to make any changes, they don't need a permit, you really wouldn't capture it. So you know, I mentioned earlier, some communities love the idea, but then some sort of back off on it a little bit. Part of that's the reason you just brought up.
Yeah, like, I love it.
It's a great
I love it, but then I'm just
concept
like,
and-
so how do you actually, like,
So-
enforce
so-
it?
So they've actually required the owners to sign an affidavit and basically demonstrating how that you are. Not a whole complicated thing, not a study you have to go hire an engineer, but just something in writing demonstrating that you are truly a local business. And then at least there's something as part of your permit that there's a record, so if somebody comes in, changes the use after the fact, you would then have the ability to go in and collect a higher fee. So it is another level of work. So it's, again, it's a trade-off between the incentive you've provided and the additional work, you know, longer term that's associated with it.
Okay.
Give me just a second. Mr. Manzares, is that sounds like a
Well,
huge legal
and I think
issue.
it's not a huge legal issue, it's more of a practical issue, because practically the door, for lack of a better expression, the door is not gonna open for the city to go back to the existing business unless they do something to either change the use, expand the existing use. Otherwise, the city's really not gonna know whether it was, you know, Jane and John Smith last month, or it's, you know, Taco Great out of California next week.
Yeah, so that's my concern is, like, I love the idea, but just how do you actually regulate it, the practicality of it?
And I'll be honest, there are some communities I work in, Palm Beach Garden and Miami Beach being two of them. They have a very strict code in terms of both in code enforcement and tying it to a whole long list of business use permits and business use licenses. So they actually have it tied to their business use license. But if you don't have that robust of a system, it does become a potential issue
Yeah.
to actually enforce it.
Yeah. And then the other thing is about the 3 different tiers of fee. I'm not sold on that idea. I don't know that, I believe just because you're in this one area, you're not generating trips all around the city. I mean, if the numbers justify the right-hand column, the right-hand column is what I would be comfortable with, because, that's something I think we've all said that we want to make sure development pays for itself. And so, again, I don't know how this correlates to what we have now. I would be open to the idea again, I'm kind of just suggesting this to the group, of, discounting the commercial to try to incentivize commercial. But outside of that, I'm not a fan of the 3-tiered mobility fee schedule.
Okay. And I will be honest, Osceola has that. So Osceola has, the lowest is around their Sunrail stations. Then they have a second category for mixed use, and then they have a third for everybody else. So, that was just one thing that staff had mentioned early on, that they'd at least like to see it, like to have the option to consider it in discussion, but ultimately it's your decision as a council whether you want to do that. But, it's a fairly common approach. You could always shrink the area as well. So I'd recommend it at first part, just your downtown CRA, which is pretty much a couple blocks right around where we're standing. The other part was your downtown plus your historic grid. And then, you have another CRA, and then you have the further. So, again, they asked me to provide the information for you all to make that decision. So ultimately, whatever direction you provide, we'll adjust that. And in terms of the larger housing, this does work really well in terms of basically treats multifamily and single family the same.
I
So
like
it gets
that.
at the very issue you were talking about. But then if you do have a concern about the upper tier, again, a lot of communities establish a threshold.
A cap,
Whether it be
yeah.
3,500 square feet, 5,000, 10,000, or even lower if you want. Alachua County, where I've done a lot of work at, and I was the impact fee administrator. At the time, we had, the average house started kind of leveling out at 2,600 square foot. So that's the cap that we established there. Sarasota, we're having that discussion actually next week, and it'll probably be around the 3,500 to 5,000 range.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely, I like that idea. I mean, if we were gonna do it, I would definitely, I don't know if the practical application of it makes this really difficult on staff, because instead of just saying, there's 50 homes and here's the fee, and that's, they would literally have to do house by house, like what the square footage of the house is. I don't know if that becomes too cumbersome for,
A lot of times, that's how
Staff?
most places price building permits.
okay.
So most building permits are actually priced on a per square foot basis. I mean, again, your staff may be able to say something's different, but every community I work in, that's sort of been the case. So that's generally a metric that's provided relatively simple.
Well, and just my last comment is, if Osceola County is doing the 3-tiered mobility fee schedule, I would like if staff could reach out to them to see, do they have lessons learned, or are they happy with that decision? Do they regret that decision? If they've been calculating the fees based off of this, it would be just interesting. Usually you have some kind of unique perspectives after you actually do it for a few years. So,
Absolutely.
that's it for me. Thank you.
No, those are all great questions. Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Okay. So initially going through this, I was looking for the backup report to justify
Right.
some of this, so the discussion's helped. I've gone through and checked some of the square footages based on Osceola County is based on our current fee. On our current fee, Osceola County's current fee is $9,055 when you are outside of those mixed-use areas and the whatever. To equal, at $2.18 per square foot, that's a 4,153 square foot house would to equal out the county. Ms. Matheny, just to show that kind of square footage. So I kind of did some rough math based on a 2,100 square foot house. I don't know if that's the average that's being built now, which gets you in the core area of a $714 per house. In the mixed use was, my math's all scribbled all over the place, but it ends up being like half of what our current fee is when we have this. Kind of found the same results going through, like industrial went from $4.17 a square foot, which seemed really high, down to 87 cents, which is probably a little more. Oh, and that's in the core area, down to $1.52 in the other regular area. Mini storage was kind of about the same. Office went down about in half. Medical office was about the same. Retail, because of the split now, it was almost $9 a square foot. Now it's between $4 and $8 a square foot. So, just some of these things have just now cut in half, essentially, from what the current adopted fee is, even though we're only on the commercial taking in 30%. Is that what the current adopted rate is? I think we have it reduced down, either reduced 30% or reduced down to 30%.
It was reduced to 30, I thought.
Okay. And then so these fees, and that's what I was looking for the backup, is kind of what went into calculating the fees. I thought back in the day it was, you have your improvements, you have, per lane mile cost for some of those, trip generation, and the number of trips you get, and then you calculate your fee based on, your ITE use.
Right.
Is that kind of the same way?
It's similar here, but actually the big bases, as opposed to a generic per lane mile cost. So I actually took your entire mobility plan, assigned a capacity to it that had a number. Then you had the costs they already provided, divided that too. So that basically forms your basis. And then what we did is took trip generation, converted that to what's known as a person trip.
Okay.
Through data that's actually Orlando-based. And then you apply the other factors, pass-by trips, internal capture, mixed use. So it's similar to the roadway, but there's probably about 3 or 4 more steps that actually go into it.
Okay. But based on that, fee is essentially cut in half?
Well, depending on the use and depending on the area, it potentially can be, yes.
Okay, because it seemed like usually there's that squeeze the balloon and you get a little push and pull. It seemed like all of them reduced down. I didn't see any that
Well,
went out.
part of that is, there's more recent data in terms of trip lengths as well. And some folks, you gotta be a little careful here. You charge a fee within your city's only so large. If you're charging development for travel outside of your city and you're not making improvements outside of your city, you start to run into some nexus issues. So I can't say what the previous consultant did, but I've ran into it in some other communities with cities, is they tend to use the approach they use for counties and cities. And the reality is your community is not as big as the county. And so from a technical basis, my trip lengths tend to be more reflective of what occurs in your city or in cities as opposed to what occurs in Osceola County.
Okay.
Because one, if I get challenged on it, that's something I can defend. It's a real world example is I do work for Sarasota County. That certain consultant firm does work for the city of Sarasota. So the city of Sarasota, the builders are essentially getting ready to challenge that fee because the city of Sarasota is only 3 miles wide, and they're being charged for 6 and 7 miles trip length. I'm just going to leave it at that. In terms of you getting charged for something beyond what you generate, and there are no improvements identified outside of city limits. So, I tend to take a little bit more
But then
conservative
if they use
approach.
general lane mile costs, their costs are double and triple that because of eminent domain costs and construction
Correct,
in a
correct.
dense area. It's just
And that's the other part is too, is your mobility plan includes roadways, but it doesn't include a ton of roadways. So, there aren't, if you're not 6-laning a road, you're not 8-laning a road, you're not going to include that as part of the cost.
Yeah.
And your mobility plan doesn't have that. And so, that's another part of the factor that goes into it as well.
On the list from the mobility plan, I didn't see anything in there for turn lanes, traffic signals. I think there was one bike lane project, or was maybe just roadway projects that included bike lanes. Is any of that included in here?
It is. So, you had lighting, you had traffic signals, you had some intersections. So one thing you can do with staff is look at that list again and see if there's some additional projects that need to be added to it. Again, I just solely went on the information provided, but if there are other projects that need to be included in there, we could certainly do that and they would factor into it. So yes, if your plan is heavy on the multimodal and lighter on the roadway capacity. So if you add some of those higher dollar items that are in there, it would have a material effect on the fee itself.
And I guess that's one of my questions is that on the person capacity. So if you have, which is the middle of the road, some of these are high, some of these are low. Pine Tree Drive, expand 4 lanes, $11 million cost, and it's 101,000 person capacity. So is the fee charged per ERU based on like 3 people in the house, or is that like how does that? Because you might be a driver today, you might be a biker tomorrow, and you might be a.
So what we basically assume is you make it easy for single-family homes. There's 10 trips, and you have an adjustment factor for single-family homes. The converting it from a vehicle trip to a person trip is basically 2. So it's a factor of 2. So you go from 10 vehicle miles of travel to 20. So in that respect, that number is higher. But you also include the capacity of both a travel lane and a sidewalk and a bike lane if they're being provided. Whereas before, what would happen is the cost of the bike lane and the sidewalk just got added to the road with no recognition that they actually add capacity. Again, I tend to take a little bit more of a conservative approach in terms of calculating these fees. So if you charge for a sidewalk, I assign a capacity to it. If you charge for a bike lane, I assign a capacity to it. That way, there's a very strong nexus between charging the fee and what you're spending it on.
So if on, I'll use that same example. It doesn't say it in here, but I imagine there are bike lanes and sidewalks on that Pine Tree Drive one I mentioned. if you if you remove those from it, there is some cost. But it would maybe reduce the cost 10, 15%, but then reduce the person capacity a whole lot less. Would that increase the total fee?
It would. If that's what actually happens, I'll be honest with you, what I'm finding is the bike lanes are coming in about $1 million a mile. Sidewalks are about 250,000. Trails are about 500,000. So sidewalks probably help some, but it's definitely not a 1-to-1 in terms of the ratio. But you are on the right path though. You're not heavy on the roadway capacity side, and the roadway capacity side's what's expensive. And so the more roadway type projects you had in there, the higher the overall fee would be.
Because I'm looking at just roughly 80 or $90 million worth of improvements on here. How do we get to the money getting in the bank for that 80 or 90 million? And I just want to make sure that the way this is calculated actually gets us there. And
Yeah.
With the change in methodology, I just want to make sure that
It is. So then you take that dollar number, divide it by the capacity provided, and that number I think it was around $250 to $300 per unit of capacity. So it's still, it's relatively high in that regards. One thing I could look at, depending on these categories, is the trip lengths that were used, and see if, if you don't want to go to this final level of detail, there may be some additional adjustments that can be done there to the extent I can justify it.
Okay. And then Ms. Matheny kind of mentioned that not being the biggest fan of the 3 different assessment areas. I'm not really as well, especially with MXD. It seems like every new thing coming through is MXD, and I don't know if we're actually getting. It is becoming a mixed-use development. It seems like it's all residential, and especially with the way retail is going and just everything. I just don't know if that's.
I'll be honest with you, we had that same discussion in Sarasota recently. So 5 years ago, we had mixed-use category, and what we found is that exact same thing. Predominantly, it's residential, so they actually just based it on wherever you're located at in the community. They still have 3 tiers, but it's different east side of the interstate, and then along what's equivalent to their 1790 or their
192.
Yeah, 441 here. US 41 is a 6-lane arterial going through the old Tamiami Trail. They have what's known as urban infill along that. So just the commercial and just the non-residential parcels along that roadway actually have a reduced fee. Anything that's residential that's off of it or has a residential parcel has a normally calculated fee. So that's one way they specifically targeted urban infill, and then 2 other areas of the county are higher.
Yeah, and I kind of like the carrot and the stick approach of if we want commercial in a corridor, Nolte, whether it's commercial or industrial or whatever, then yes, we can have some sort of fee incentive for that area if that's the behavior
Yeah,
we want.
so what I'd recommend is, to the extent most of it's zoned or land use commercial industrial, if you'd like to take a corridor approach, limit it to non-residential uses along that, and then there's a factor that we could apply to that.
Yeah.
And then it would target specifically non-residential.
Because my worry is if you take a large tract of land and you have to get it mixed use, you have to have 10% of some other use, and you just forget about that 10% of the land area and you get that reduced fee, and then it doesn't matter in the end, right? If you just even throw that away, you got a reduced fee of more than even that property value, but we don't get the thing that we want, which is the non-residential use.
Yeah, you have to have really tight land use controls to make that work, and phasing schedules. Some communities it works really well. Others, have similar experiences to what you've had.
Okay, and then it's just different now. I always like to see the comparison versus our peers, and now it's
Yeah, and that's something we can provide. Again, I think there are some issues in terms of coordinating that, but I think when I can get to the point where I can figure out what 30% or 60% of 80% of your commercial reductions are, we'll provide that as a follow-up and get it to staff, and they can provide that to you, so you can have that information.
Okay, so we can have offline discussions about the projects.
Yes.
In or out.
Yeah.
assessment area, I wasn't the biggest fan of, but if we can figure out some corridors, benefit district is what it is. Oh, and we're talking about that, because we have our joint planning area, and we have to play nice in the sandbox with the county. Just want to make sure there's some coordination, like Ms. Matheny said, of make sure it's somewhat close. I don't know if you can force the fee to be somewhat close, but at least we can talk about that.
Okay.
And then, yeah, just looking at some of these proposed fees versus what our existing is, or our peers when we're shifting some of those around.
All right.
Councilmember Matheny.
So one of the things you just said to Mr. Trace was about the cost of, I think, the trails. What did you say the cost you were doing, 500,000?
In general, they have a cost associated with it, but on average, they're about $500,000 per mile.
Because see, what caught my attention is I've seen the plan that the county put together for their ultimate road and sidewalk and trail, and I think they have $1 million a mile for trail. I mean, it's a really high number, so that's just kind of when you were saying that, and I'm like, well, I mean, are we using the right numbers? And I don't know what justification they had when they said $1 million per mile. I about fell out of my seat, but when they put in all of the land acquisition, relocating the utilities, the engineering, the construction, all that other stuff. Like, so I just want to make sure we're also kind of, maybe that's another thing we could look at to make sure.
Right. And to be honest with you, I just had a discussion in Sarasota County, same thing. I was shocked when they came back at $1 million a mile, but when you start bringing in all those exact factors, again, here's our plan. It's already been costed out to you. Take that information, make sure it's legitimate, but if that's what it is, use it. So, if some direction to the staff is to relook at some of those projects, then could work with me on that.
Yeah, so Osceola County, I don't know if that's for staff to do or for the consultant to do, Bill, but I know that they spent, 6 or 8 months with a ton of consultants and went through and created a whole program for not even, I think it's like a 40-year program or something, and they costed all of these roads and trails and sidewalks and stuff.
I'll be honest with you, we were asked to Ref Tallis and I do a lot of work out throughout the community. All the ones I typically do, I do the mobility plan and the mobility fee, because to be honest, a lot of the questions being asked come up. And so, again, I'm sort of using what was provided, which is good. In hindsight, I should have done what I've done with a couple of other communities I've just done it with. They gave me their plan, and I said, that's good, but knowing what I see, it isn't going to cut what you need it to be. And so, we got to redo part of the plan. And like you said, that 6 month, 8 month, I look 20 years out, I look 25 years out. Mm-hmm. I use different factors. There's a lot of things that go into it. It takes some time, takes some funding, but it's a more justification to get to sort of where you're at. And that's what we did originally in Osceola 5 years ago. Went through sort of that process, but.
Right.
Councilmember Askew.
Thank you. Really, the only question I asked was, I need to see more comparables.
Okay.
And I think I wasn't too much of a fan of the 3 different areas, but Mr. Trace just brought up if you do want to incentivize the commercial on Nolte, for example, you're going to have a different area for that. You can't just isolate it out of the blue. So I would like to look into that as well. Anything we need to do increase commercial, but I need some kind of comparable to another city, what we had. It's really difficult to kind of blend these in that you have there and try to figure it out. But overall, I like where we're going with it.
Okay.
Well, I want to make a comment.
Yes, sir.
It sounds like an engineering dream to talk about all this stuff.
Actually, I'm a planner. I just my engineering.
To me, it sounds like we're, a nightmare for staff to implement. You talked about the difficulty of trying to figure everything out, and that's one of the reasons I love simplicity. And I think one of the things that certainly has to be figured into this discussion, it's easy for us as a council to pass policies and rules and changes, but then the staff has to implement it. They got to carry it out. And I think, you know, we've got to really make sure we've heard from the staff and that we understand that, you know, I just think it ought to be simple enough that it's understandable, that it can be carried out, because one of the complaints we often get is a developer or a builder comes in and then they're told one thing and then they come back later and they're told something else. And part of the problem is you got to train your staff on how to do all of this and how to remember all of this and implement all this. And one of the problems we have is keeping staff, and then you're going through this revolving door, and then and you know, it becomes very challenging, you know, for people to want to build.
And Mr. Mayor, again, you didn't have a lot of the benefit of that. You're 100% correct. And so before we ever even got to this level, I laid out 6 different alternatives for staff. 6 different schedules, 6 different assessment areas, all these different factors, because you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, I have a recommendation, but it's staff who provided feedback. And so this schedule is really a reflection of some of the good feedback that we had from them. I don't ever like to go in to assume, you know, anything. And really, the local was probably, that's really is a policy decision, you know, because again, it's good on one side, but depending on what your system's structured at, could be an administrative headache. So I apologize to.
No problem. I personally, you know, I like the simplicity of one fee when it comes like to building residential. You know, when you start giving breaks to people that are building 400,000 plus square foot homes, it's like, well, we're cutting the deal for the rich again, but we sock the full amount to the people on the lower end. And I just think if you can build a $400,000, $500,000 home, you can probably afford it. And I don't necessarily think that you know, we ought to cut them a deal. They ought to have to pay for the same square footage fee everybody else does. That's just my personal feeling of that issue. I thought it was also interesting when you talked about the Taco Bells. It looks like they're going to smaller facilities because they realize they can make just as much money, if not more, just with a drive-through. But
Yep.
And then those multiple drive-through lanes are certainly increasing their business and the impact on our roads. I think that's certainly something that ought to be brought into the equation.
Yeah, you're seeing the exact same thing with banks too. Bank branches are getting smaller and smaller.
We definitely ought to sock it to banks now, because they got all that money, right?
If you actually look at it, they're up there now, we're proposing, you know, a drive-through lane and a per ATM, because a lot of them, all they're doing is, unless they have a headquarters, they want to have some presence, they're going into a parking lot and they're plopping down 2, 3, 4 automated tellers with a bunch of drive-through lanes in them. They generate traffic, but they don't generate jobs or anything else associated with it. So this, you know, schedule at least recognizes that.
Well, that's certainly interesting. I agree. I agree with what I think everybody says. We certainly want to encourage commercial and possibly industrial development. I'm not sure, you know, how we totally do that, but I think that whatever we can. And then the other thing in the back of my mind is, you know, how you do all of this and then still deal with how do you incentivize building affordable housing for your workforce and for people that are struggling, and you know, how do we take that into account?
And I'll be honest with you, that was one of the drivers behind the consolidated residential category, is just that factor. You know, workforce housing affordable tends to be smaller footprint. Right. And what's happening is when you go to either tiers or per unit, you're just telling us, you know, a 1-bedroom versus a 5-bedroom, you're paying the same rate. Where this, if you're building 500 square foot studio, you pay for that, and 3,000 square foot house, you pay for that. So this has actually been a really well received, you know, approach, at least, to addressing some of the affordability. Doesn't get you all the way there, but it's one factor that's helped.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
All right, well, I appreciate all your feedback, and I will follow up with staff, work on getting those comparisons to you, and then talk to them some about the plan itself.
Right. Well, I don't know how you do all this. I'd have to take a lot of Tylenol if I had your job, that's for sure. So thank you. You've done an excellent job. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. And Jonathan, you'll be around in case anything else. We'll go through three more impact fees here, but they'll be a little shorter. Joe's going to take us through that presentation. We do have that technical report, and there's a lot of detail in there, and just want to recognize that staff's help and reviewing that, and there's a lot of data on the different with mobility. It's more complicated, but it's just dealing with roads and trails and so forth. Here, we have police, we have fire, we have recreation. So, each of them have to coordinate with us, and I appreciate their help during this process. And so, as we go through these, something may pop in your head. So, if Jonathan, if you're available, he can come back up and address something. And Joe's going to take us through the rest of the police, fire, and recreation. And we do have some comparisons for you, too,
All right.
so you can see what those impacts look like.
Thank you, Tony.
All right, thank you, good afternoon. As Tony mentioned, we will jump into
Could you just go ahead and state your name again for the record?
Yes, Joe Williams from Raftellus. And we'll jump right into the police and fire. We'll kind of go through them simultaneously. So these are, generally going to be smaller fee levels than the mobility. You're going to be, the key funding is for the buildings that are required to support police and fire staffing. That goes for sworn officers, firefighters, and support staff. And the vehicles and equipment for new hires. And the key drivers of this study is on the police side. The first item there, the future public safety facility. Police is looking at one large facility sometime in the near future to house all their staffing, have capacity for additional future staffing levels that they need. And as they're going through some additional space planning right now to kind of bring those plans into a little bit better focus, which on the last bullet point there, you see we kind of recommend an update to the fees in the next 3-4 years as that really comes into focus a little bit more. But that's the key driver on the fee level that we have right now. And then on the fire side, there's a major replacement of an existing station, and then there's a couple new stations, and a new administrative building, all happening within the next 5 years or so. There's a lot of activity on the fire and new facilities. And then the non-residential, you currently have one blanket non-residential category. And what we've done is we kept it very simple. As we just talked about on mobility, there's many different categories. We've established two. There's an industrial warehouse category where it's really big footprint and low traffic. And then kind of everyone else is still in that other blanket non-residential per square foot category. And, we'll say that you can get more complex on land uses on police and fire. So some communities have as many as you see on the mobility that you just looked at, and some still have 1, 2, 3 categories. So it's kind of the desire of the policymakers. And the calculation, and I'll give you a little bit of additional information as we go through this. You can see on the police side, on the left, the bottom line number, $983 is the calculation. And on the top part of that, you can see the 3 primary fee components that build up to the $33 million that have been factored in. And we have equipment, vehicles, and funding for the new public safety building. Equipment, for impact fee purposes, we've built in right around $15,000 per officer to equip them with weaponry and certain other equipment that'll be about that 5-year lifespan that Tony mentioned at the beginning. Vehicles, this is purchasing vehicles and equipping those vehicles. It's right around $47,000, $48,000 per vehicle built in there. And over the time frame from approximately the next 10 years, the police department is looking at going from 108 sworn officers up to 144 sworn officers. So that's kind of what's being funded in here. And I will just say on a general approach, what we've done is to make sure that no deficiencies are being funded, we've accounted for costs of existing officers and new officers in the schedule. And then we have a functional population, which is detailed in the report a little bit more. We have a total in 2030, and we divide the total cost by the total functional population. So existing and growth over the next 10 years are kind of, they have the same cost level. So you're not charging the fee to existing, but it's based on providing the facilities and allocating the costs proportionally. And then on the fire side, you see the bottom line fee there, $899. And the components that go into it between equipment, vehicles, and then three different lines for the buildings there. So again, you have your existing buildings that folks are buying into. Development is happening kind of all over, so there's some capacity to serve existing, plus there's new stations and new admin buildings that are being provided that benefit growth, but then also are going to have capacity to benefit development beyond the next 10-year period. So we've allocated a portion of those costs into this calculation, and then a portion beyond that future growth is going to buy into. And how this compares, on the top, we have the police, and we have the 4 different land uses, and we have existing, proposed, and change. And the big highlight is multifamily. Currently, you have a 55% factor that's applied to the multifamily units. And based on looking at U.S. Census data, they have information available on persons per household by how many units are in the households. So we aggregated that data for the city of St. Cloud, and it was right around a 90% factor for persons per household on multifamily versus single family. So we did maintain the approach of having a slightly lower fee, or a lower fee. In this case, it's slightly lower as opposed to much lower. And that leads to about the $350 increase on the multifamily side for police, whereas the single family is just going up to $20, $21, $22. And you can see on the industrial warehouse, that fee is being reduced because, again, it's large footprint, not a lot of traffic, not a lot of employees per 1,000 square feet. So a lot less people, a lot less potential for police activity. And on the other non-residential, it follows a similar trend on the residential side where there's an increased fee, increased funding that is required for this study versus what may have been done previously. And on fire, similar trend, just different ratios that you can see there. $150 increase on the fire side. There's a lot of buildings being funded, and buildings being the key driver for the fire. Another $390 increase on the multifamily side, and then similar increases, decreases for the industrial warehouse versus the other non-residential. And we'll get into how this compares with everybody else after we go through the recreation. And on the recreation, you have a new master plan. It's just a couple years old, and we looked at the projects that were in the master plan, and those served as the funding, or the projects that were needed to serve existing development and growth. And through a similar process, we looked at the proportional benefits between existing development and future development. And this applies to residential only. And through that process, we identified about a little over $14 million of cost that would be in alignment with growth over the next 10 years or so. You do have several really large improvements. The Lakefront Master Plan, Chisholm Park. You just purchased land for the ranch at St. Cloud. There's a new community center and aquatic center. So portions of each of those projects are included in the fee calculation here. Because those are large, citywide facilities. They're going to have benefits to existing development, who's going to get to use them. And they're going to have enough capacity that growth over the next 30 years or so is going to be able to participate in using those facilities as well. So that's how we've designed the fee structure. And you can see the cost for single-family unit is right around $2,100. And here we are at the same 90% factor on the multifamily. I believe your current factor is about 80%. So that's an increase to that factor on this side as well, and that multifamily factor is consistent between the three different fee categories. And so in total, on an existing versus proposed or calculated fee for single family, you can see you're going from $3,550, $3,981 is the calculated proposed fee, for an increase of $429 per unit. And how you compare with several others that we looked at, mostly local, some other kind of similar type of communities. And this is just the police, fire, and parks fees. So other fees that many charge, such as water, wastewater, schools, things like that, are not included. So you're jumping up just above Oviedo as the highest in this group that we have. You know, I will say that just the amount of investment going into your police and fire is significant. It's those fees relatively are higher than we see in a lot of other communities, but you have the investment there to support the fee. Otherwise, we wouldn't have calculated a fee that high. And the parks, you're kind of in alignment with what we see in a lot of other places. Those fees often range all the way from $1,000 to $2,500 for parks. So for the police and fire, you know, just you're a little bit higher, but the fees are calculated and justified based on proven methodology. They're supported. So that's what brings you to the top end of the chart here. And just a few findings and recommendations, and then we can get into questions. So we do recommend at least adopting the study and the fees that go along with it. Now, you do have the ability to implement reduced fees if you so chose, but the fees we've calculated, we would recommend them, and they're fully justified, as I mentioned. So we're not recommending adopting a reduced fee, but that's something that you are able to do. The fees represent the cost of providing service to growth, and then just some other kind of statute item is keep the fees in their designated reserves. That's so you can prove out your dual rational nexus. You collect them into the police fund and spend them on police facilities. And then going back to the police space planning and kind of how that new facility comes to fruition in a few years, we're recommending looking at an update in the 2024 timeframe to make sure you capture current and localized costs and have your plan in place. Since that facility is such a large driver of the fee, you want to make sure your fee is in alignment with the costs required for that facility.
Okay.
And that was
Have
what
any
we
questions? Any questions? Councilmember Matheny.
Sure. Thank you again. Can you go back to the slide that you had the two arrows real quick, and then go to the slide before that? I just wanted to see what 3981 was. So that's single family detached. Okay. I didn't know what that was, if that was single or multifamily. I like that you've brought the multifamily closer in line with the single family. I never understood why we discounted it like we did. Personally, I would like to see them be the same fee. Just my opinion on that. I don't see why discounting. And plus, I feel like, particularly with the fire services, isn't it when you have a building with all these units in it, doesn't that make the fire hard? I mean, and maybe that doesn't go into the calculation, but doesn't that make the fire harder to fight? Like if you had to go and do fire services for a multifamily building, isn't that harder to fight than a single family building? I don't know if that goes into the fee or not.
Mayor?
Mr.
Yes, you're correct.
Yeah, I mean, so personally, I would like to see not discounted at all for the multifamily. But other than that, I don't really have any comments. Did you have a comparison between, you did have City of Kissimmee and Osceola County on that list? You did, yeah. Because Kissimmee, okay. All right, nope, I don't have any other comments.
Trace.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so on the police fee, we're calculating 36 new officers for the growth period we were talking about. Does that, well, 36 extra FTE, does that include officers, command staff, corporals, lieutenants, sergeants, all that? Is that everything combined, or is that just like the number of on-the-street officers?
That includes the sergeants and.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's, because I know once you have a certain number, then you need, you know, the management tier that kind of goes up. Once
Right,
you
we
start
really
adding-
just take out the top level, the guys who don't necessarily scale up. Yeah.
Perfect, okay, just want to make sure of that. And then, kind of on your point on that fire question is, some of this should, I don't know how we get to that at some point in the future, but be, you know, fees being based on calls for service on certain things, or fire risk on a building. If you add sprinklers, it helps out, but I guess they get a discount on the insurance side of things, but maybe not the impact fee side of things. But you can do certain things to make a building less fire prone, which you almost should get some sort of benefit for that if you have fire sprinklers, you have something. So I don't know how we can work that out. On the cost on the vehicles for the fire side of things, did that include the cost to outfit those vehicles? Because I know you buy a fire truck, they're very expensive, but then all the fun stuff that goes inside almost seems like it doubles the cost of the truck. Was that baked into the costs in here?
Yes, and that was some back and forth we had with fire to make sure those costs were adequately in there,
Okay.
and that they are.
And then, when I looked at the backup in the full report, we had Station 33 already depreciated out to 1.6 million. How much did that cost to build? Do we know? 7.5 or 2 point? 2.75. Okay, it just seemed like it.
It was a very low cost economical station.
Mr. Sturgeon.
I just want to make sure it's on the record,
Yes, you need to.
2.75 million. Thank you.
2.75.
It just seemed like it depreciated down to 1.6 already, and I think we put more money in with the generator and some other stuff. It just seemed like it jumped down pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I'll just jump, I think that is one that we asked about because it appeared to be an affordable station at the time compared to what it costs now, what's built into the new capital program.
Yeah, it
And
mentioned
it
Station 33
verified.
rebuild, 32 rebuild at $6 million, which something brand new, 1.6 million versus something that we're about to rebuild for 6 million. So I just wanted to make sure those numbers made sense.
Yep.
Okay, if you could go back 2 or 3 slides. Keep going. That one. Okay, so I understand. Like, let's look at the. Which one did I look at? I guess the police side. We've got equipment cost. We've got vehicle cost. We've got the building. So we get this $33 million, and that's based on the growth. So that's what it takes to go from today's population to the 2030 population.
No.
So that's the total.
That's the total to
Book
serve
value.
what's in 2030.
But that equipment cost number matched the equipment cost for the new vehicles for that growth period.
It should, you have the.
Not the whole fleet.
Right, it should match, let me just find it here.
Okay, I'm correct. Mayor,
Yes.
I'm sorry. We just double-checked the actual cost of the Station 33 was 2.25. Additionally, I just want to point out that back then, our financial picture was different than it is now, and we did pay cash for that building. It wasn't what we call an affordable structure. We met all the building code. The building code has changed now, so that's why we have to, we by building code, we can't build that building again because of the hurricane changes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have the report in front of you, table 11,
11 cost per vehicle. Okay.
we have $47,600 per vehicle. And then if you just added the 36 officers, 39 with an allowance for some reserve vehicles.
Okay.
That'd be about $1.8 million. And
Of the new
then,
vehicles. Okay.
And then the existing vehicles, there's 121 of them. And that's an additional 5.7 million.
Okay, I just want to make sure we had the right functional population. I don't know who's functional or not functional, but divided by the cost. It just seems low once you add a $23 million building in there, then on the fire side, 10 million here, 11 million here. It just seemed like the number was low based on the total capital that's going to have to be outlaid in the next couple of years.
Okay. Yeah.
And then on the fire stations, I just want to make sure, it seems like every station we're building then has to get a traffic signal added. There's land cost. I just want to make sure all of that was in this fee when we're talking about new station 34 and 35.
Okay, we'd have to ask staff or see, we have the capital program and we got the total cost of the building. I'm not exactly sure if those intersection improvements are included in that or not. We'd have to go back and verify or have staff confirm.
Of course, the furthest one away.
Jason Miller, Fire Chief. For Fire Station 32 rebuild, we do not have to budget for one currently in that project as it's already under construction. For outlying stations, we did include that in the estimates.
Okay, so right now we can build new fire stations 34 and 5 for 5.6 million, and that includes
That's
land.
their
and
depreciated value. If you look back into the report, I believe it comes in at 4.25 because
Each.
of the spread of over time that they calculated into the
Okay.
mix. Did I say that
So
correctly?
can we
Yeah, and I can-
depreciate out the functional people too?
I'll clarify that.
It's called retirement.
Okay.
We looked at those buildings and the total cost, I think the total cost was $8.2 million or so
For the two of them?
for the two of them. And we took basically 66% of them. We said that that portion is going to benefit existing development plus growth over the next 10 years. And then the remaining third, essentially, there would still be some capacity for additional growth beyond the 2030 timeframe.
Okay, so now that you mention that, but like some of the stations that, Station 33 that we built with cash, right, cash reserves, that has additional capacity or had additional capacity that new development is taking on. Why that 33% reduction on new stations? If some of the existing ones we have are getting chewed up by new development, then you build a new one and.
Right. So Station 33, for example, the way it's priced in here, it would be essentially fully utilized by existing and growth over the next 10 years. And then these other facilities that are being built in 3-5 years from now, we're recognizing that they do have benefit beyond the 10-year period.
Okay.
But the existing ones are fully priced in. It's the new ones that kind of get spread out a little bit further to recognize that there will be some additional capacity.
Okay,
And part of that is that you have, I believe you have three stations now and a population of about 58,000. And kind of the ratios we're looking at is you're adding about 20,000 population over the next 10 years versus the 58,000 you have now. So does it exactly work out that you have 3 stations now and you can fully fund 2 additional stations with just 20,000 population? So that's why we spread out those costs a little bit further to recognize that those ratios and not make sure we're charging growth on the same basis as existing, not funding any potential deficiencies. I don't think there are any deficiencies, but it would be the appearance that you're making growth. The next 20,000 people pay for 2 stations, whereas the first 60,000 paid for 3.
Well, and that's like, we had 3 stations back when there was 30,000 population. So that's what, I just want to make sure that that extra capacity was there that's getting eaten up by new development is paying for the new ones that come after that.
Yes.
Did you have another one? I think I heard the buzzer.
Are you done?
Sure.
Okay. Councilmember Matheny.
Thank you. So, Councilman, I'm sorry you have 2 engineers up here. We apologize to the other council members all the time for that. Mr. Trace just asked a question that kind of made me think about it is, I don't know if population is a way to look at the stations, for sure, but I don't know if it's the way without looking at other things, because you used to be able to drive through town in 10 minutes. you know? So 3 stations, they could still serve the area. Well, now it takes you 25 minutes to drive through town. So I don't know if it's an exact correlation of population to look at too. I think there's a factor that needs to go in, like travel time too for the fire stations. But the other question, and I don't think you've answered it completely yet, or maybe it's you did and I just don't, the 23, well, the cost for the new buildings, like you just said, the $5.6 million, it's like the cost of the stations is actually 8.2, and then you did a factor of like 66% attributable to the new development. But is there any way to scale the dollars? Because you're not gonna build it today, right? So in 4 years, that $5.6 million is gonna be $8 million. And so like we're funding for today dollars, but we're not gonna have the money until so many years in the future. Is there a way to accommodate that in the numbers for the stations?
We can definitely build in a cost escalation
Yeah.
factor into future buildings.
I
We can do
definitely
that.
think we would need to do that, because it's like, we're like planning for it, and it's $23 million for the new public safety, but by the time we go to build it, it's $32 million, and so we're still $9 million short, so.
And since you're mentioning the public safety building, the current estimate is that that's a $42 million building. And
I know, I'm sure you did that percentage,
we did the 66%.
Right.
And then we did additional reduction for contingencies since that building is currently under, basically the space planning is under review. So there's going to be a new cost number. It may be higher, it may be lower. Your police fee is already being calculated higher than a lot of other communities. So we put a little extra contingency on the low side to keep that fee a little bit more reasonable until there's really a plan in place that, council's bought into, that and that the police has their full plan and presented, and that there's buy-in, that the community's going to start moving forward with that facility. So we've tried to be a little bit conservative including it until it's a little bit more well-defined.
well, the other argument I think we could make is, yes, we had a certain number of stations, was a much smaller population, but they've been overrun for 15 years, so that hasn't been the appropriate number of stations, that's just all we've had. So, I don't know too that you could just say, 3 stations served all these people, so to add 20,000, it should only be this percentage. I think you need to look at it that way too, like how many people was appropriate for those 3 stations,
And
not like current population.
And I'll add a couple of comments on the fire side because that was the example I used. So one, on the impact fee side, we do use a little bit more of a simplistic proportionality projection on how much funding goes into it. The fire guys, when they're planning their buildings and their response times, they're doing exactly what you're saying. It's much more complex. It's based on the needs. It's based on traffic, where they can get, where they can't get. But we try to keep it a little bit more simplistic to show that, maybe it's less than what they really need, but the city's only invested in 3 stations now. And it goes along the lines of the funding deficiency argument that's in the statute. You can't fund deficiencies. You have 3 stations for roughly 60,000 population. Our developer's going to come in and say, you're charging me 2 stations for the next 20,000. You're funding deficiencies because you've been operating on, 3 for the 60,000. You're right. Now you're charging me for deficiencies. And
Yeah,
it's
I get that.
just
I get
that
that.
simple
I
argument
get
is,
that.
is we try to build that in and accommodate that.
That's fair. I would like to see if we could put it in future dollars though, like to try to estimate, and that's with the road and all those road mobility projects too. It's like, are those today dollars? Or are those like, if you have a program, I'm sure the city has a program that they say they're gonna build these things however many years out, like, so they should be in some kind of price escalation to those dollars, to the best of your ability. I mean, I know we're not perfect with any of this, but that's it.
Mr. Askew?
No, you sort of answered just about every question from the two engineers that on the outside of me here. Yeah, it's just, it's hard, and I'm comfortable with being the top impact fee. We're the fastest growing city, and Oviedo is right behind us, and Claremont as well, so we really need to take care of our citizens that have been here for a long time, and we're trying to get the developers to pay their way, so I'm comfortable with that, and I appreciate the engineers' questions, because I'm sure the mayor and I are like, never thought of that, so I appreciate it, so thank you.
Part of what, I'm sitting here trying to get my head around is so much, our future growth also depends on our water capacity. And part of the question is do we have the capacity to add this amount of growth by the year 2030? And now you got the state also trying to pull back on our permits. Is that going to continue? And so here we're making these plans, and I'm just wondering, how does that figure into that? I'm just.
Maybe Marjorie will find her way
So
back
we don't want
here.
the city to get any bigger, and.
Well, I saw Marjorie earlier. We've had good discussions with Marjorie, Utilities Director, and Brian Wheeler on that. And you're, don't have it with me, but if you look at a water and sewer comparison right now, it looks pretty much like that with these others. We know of the investment that needs to be made in future water supply, and it's a certainly a big ticket item, and the transmission infrastructure as well. That's part of our second phase of this. Right now, I don't know, I don't anticipate the fee doubling or anything like that. You are the highest around, and these things are proportional. So we will be back to this council with that here soon. So, but we're waiting on some final costs instead of having to redo and so forth. I don't think the risk of, wow, the fees double and we should have had it in place 3 months ago would have helped. I think it's going to be more incremental than that, is what we can tell right now.
The question was in regard to our water capacity by the year 2030. Do we have the capacity to add another 20,000 residents to our current water capacity? I don't remember our last study we had.
Marjorie Craig, do I have to announce myself at a workshop?
Yes.
Okay, Environmental Utilities Director. I can't even remember anymore. I've had quite a day. I'm having an electrical issue at my house. So can we add 20,000 people? We can, but we're working through the details on the capacity. So we actually were looking at the capacity sheet this morning, and I'll bring back a better answer. I've done some more than a back of the envelope, but less than a detailed capacity study. And with Brian and I, we think we're good, but we also know that we will need to promote a very strong water conservation ethic. We will need to optimize our water resources, especially reuse and irrigation, and finding ways to augment our reuse system rather than potable water, and reduce any dependence on potable water irrigation. As far as the capacity fee or the impact fees, we did have a little short workshop to just discuss where we were and the concerns about the alternative water supply project, the Cypress Lake Rock project, and I would concur with what Tony's saying about it's not going to double. I think we're going to want to increase it some within the parameters of what's there. So we have just developed our first, actually it's a 10-year CIP, but we have 5 years of a little bit more detailed stuff, and we're working out kind of the phasing and what we need to do first. So that might have been a little bit more than you wanted, but the short answer is we believe we have capacity, but we'll bring back more exact numbers.
All right, thank you very much.
But we're working
I'm sure
hard on
those will
it.
be some interesting numbers too when we hear the
And
Cypress Lake project.
And this is a great firm to work with for rates. I worked with Tony and some of the other folks with PRMG previously, and now with Riftelis, so
All right,
one of the
thank you,
best.
Marjorie.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions? Thank you. You did an excellent job. We appreciate it. Do you have anything else you need to add?
No, I think we covered it all. Thank you for your time.
All right. Tony, you have anything else for us?
I'll just say thank you. I want to reiterate thanks for staff. It's a lot to assemble, and I know we'll get direction back, and it takes 2 ordinances to adopt and 90 days to implement, unless that statute changes. So we'll see where that ends up. So
All right.
thank you.
Thank you very much. You guys okay? Y'all need to take a break? All right, I'd like to move on if I can. That brings us to our next item of discussion regarding procurement.
Mayor, while she's getting set, after the procurement, I have an item I wanted to discuss with you guys.
Okay.
Just, yes.
Mayor, I'd like to introduce our Procurement Director, Leslie Flores, who's going to walk us through this part of the workshop.
All right, Leslie, it's good to have you here.
Hi, good afternoon. Leslie Flores, Procurement Services Director.
If you could pull that mic down, there you go.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry, I have glasses, so I'm going to go back and forth between my notes and the PowerPoint. So, based on council request, I put together a short PowerPoint for you regarding our continuing service contracts. Back in 2020, we updated the procurement policy, and we adopted resolution number 2020-018R. A year later, we just brought back to you in February an update to the city manager's authority. So instead of an overall $50,000 contract term, he now can authorize up to $50,000 per contract year with a maximum of $150,000, so 3 years. Currently, we have over 45 continuing services agreements. Those are most of the professional services, engineering, surveying. We also have some trades, the HVAC services and roofing. And this increases as we issue more solicitations for continuing services. We just issued one for lift station rehab, so those will be coming forward. So these contracts require task authorizations. So we would follow the procurement policy authorization. So anything under $50,000, the city manager can authorize. Anything exceeding $50,000 would come to you. The term for these agreements is typically a 3-year term with the option of renewing for 2 additional 1-year terms. So best practice is 5 years. So currently, all of our continuing services agreement renewals are coming back to council. So you initially approve it for the 3 years, and when we come back, it comes before you. So we are proposing that we add some language to our resolutions, not amending the policy, but adding language to the resolutions that would authorize the city manager to approve the renewals and the term extensions for these agreements. If we move forward with that, we can provide a report to council monthly to update you on any of the agreements that he does renew. So basically, that's all I have for you. Do you have any questions or?
Councilmember Matheny?
I say, yes, this is a great idea. So I think I did a bad job of explaining it in the meeting when I brought it up as a change to the agenda item that was in February. But in my mind, I was like, staff goes through these solicitations, contracts are awarded, and generally, in my experience, unless something bad has happened, they go to 5 years. unless something bad has happened with the contract. But, and so then, it comes to the council, we approve it for the 3-year term, and then it has to come back 2 more times at year 4 and year 5 for the contract. So, to me, this seems like something that the city manager could approve, like administratively. Contracts, like items of work assigned to the contract would still come to council. So if he got an agreement with one of the firms to do work that exceeds $50,000, that's still coming to council. I'm just saying that administrative process to just renew a contract for another year, I would like to see if we could streamline that and make that part of city manager approval, which I like the idea too, that it's just in the agenda request. So you don't have to change your policy, so when the agenda request comes, that way, individually, maybe something comes up and somebody feels uncomfortable with that on that particular, contract, you could say you don't agree to that on this particular one. But I think it would be a great way to streamline. I know it takes a lot of time for procurement to put together these kind of administrative approvals, so I think it's a good idea.
Councilmember Trace.
Thank you. So I'll kind of go in the order of the slides because that's how my notes are. In the background slide, are there any services or vendors that you would like to see added as well? I know coming up, we're going to have lift station rehabs, we're going to have to do pipelining, all that kind of stuff. Are those vendors that we can make sure that before the issue comes, stormwater pipe issues, whatever, we've got someone on that we can just go and bid it out to the 3 that are on that continuing contract and then go?
Right, that's exactly how we want to streamline the process. Mhm.
Perfect. So kudos, all for that. And then I like the monthly report. And then is it possible, it seems like a lot of staff time goes into the vehicle purchase part when we're just using state contracts and it comes up and it's a big discussion, 37 different meetings throughout
Right.
the year. If we can just approve it once at the budget time, and if it's organized in the budget right and that everything happens for the budget, and then they can be purchased throughout the year as long as it doesn't go over the amount that's in the budget, it just happens.
I like it, because we already
So-
approved the budget.
Yeah, but I just want to make sure that the budget specifically shows these are the capital items that are being purchased, and if it's a list of 37 vehicles with a budget amount for each of them, as long as
But-
there's, now,
but it's also gonna-
now you get all cute with your why it can't happen.
Well,
Mr.
Well, let me-
Maderas.
Why we can't do it?
well, can I
No, I
just,
wasn't saying why you couldn't do it.
Oh,
it's
okay,
just
good,
that
good.
You definitely can do that, but you still have the same $50,000 issue where if you're buying a vehicle, even though it's in your budget, if the vehicle's above the $50,000 level, you'll still have to see it.
well, so my thought was to bring forward one resolution, list the vehicles that, staff wants to purchase with the budgeted amount, and then ask council if we use the state contract or the sheriff's contract. We have one resolution with you authorizing us to do our due diligence with those 2 contracts and allow us to purchase them. Can we do it that way?
But it would specifically be over the 50,000.
Correct, but you're approving.
It's
specifically
agenda
over-
So-
item.
right,
Just
you
be
do
an
it.
You're
agenda item.
approving.
You can do it that way.
But like one agenda item, or it'd be every
Like
single
one.
time?
One.
Okay, yeah.
I
That's-
like that, to say, here's the 25 vehicles, it's the dollar amount, the fund. I like that.
And
Yeah.
then the only, not to play devil's advocate on any stuff, the only issue is the timing of the acquisition given during the fiscal year could impact the price of the vehicle. Either way, could be good, could be bad. So, staff would have to take a look at that. And the city manager, remember this, the procurement manager and the city manager, even though you say we're gonna buy this vehicle and you decide you're gonna buy it in November, you approve all the vehicles, and then they show up and come back in June or July and say, no, when we priced it back in November, it was $50,000. Now it's $40,000. We're gonna go back to council and figure out how we're gonna do it.
Well, if we're using the sheriff's contract or the state contract, it's priced for the year, so we
Okay.
should be okay.
Okay, good. That was going to be my next question, is
Okay.
how long do those lock in? Is it 3, 6, 12
A year.
months? Perfect, okay.
I like it. Because I know sometimes we'll buy multiple vehicles in the agenda, and then, when you pull the agenda open and you have, 2,000 pages, and then you're like, oh, wait, this is a duplicate and a duplicate and a duplicate. So I know that takes a lot of work to do that. I like it.
So I don't know if you need head nods or.
Yeah, I don't want to, at one time, we actually asked staff to price out a motor for a beat-up old pickup truck, so now that we got it.
Please,
Oh,
no
yeah.
more.
That's a good example.
It
Yes,
was.
sir.
So, yeah, now, and as long as we're approving it in the beginning, I would love to see it
Streamline.
just streamline and happen.
Well, I certainly like the simplicity of it. The council shouldn't have to micromanage when every time you want to buy a mower or some vehicle and then, question whether or not, the staff has done their due diligence. They always do their due diligence. And what I always like about the big ticket items that, our city managers always come to us anyway and just said, just to give you an update on something that you might have a question about. But as long as there's accountability, let's make it as simple and as smart as we can, executive, just to cut down on our work and cut down on your work even more so than ours. Has my support.
Looks like.
Okay. All right.
Second.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You sure you guys don't have something else to say?
Thank you, Leslie.
Well, I do.
All right.
The floor is mine.
Well, Mr. Trace's light
Can we
is
start
on.
the,
Is he
oh, sorry,
dying
I'll
to
turn
say
it off.
something?
But can we start the
clock.
timer?
Shush.
Start the timer.
3
She
minutes.
can't see the
Shush.
timer, so it doesn't
You
matter.
want me to
Oh,
go
it
down
goes
there?
off. She'll know.
Yeah, it scares me, right? So I, for a long time, when I got on council, I guess, let's start back there. The city manager at the time had big plans for the VFW. And, those plans didn't move forward. He had a lot of plans. And so then when the new city manager came on board, Mr. Surgeon, we kind of talked about streamlining projects and making sure we could support staff. And, I was like, it's very hard to have 20 priorities. You need to, so he's done a great job at like streamlining priorities for staff. And so for a long time too, we've been talking about, wouldn't it be great if there was a way to partner with the VFW versus the previous kind of direction was we're, buying their building and relocating them and doing all these things. But I was like, instead of doing that, like, what if we try to partner with the VFW? And, I was like, they've got a great space over there. It's a historic building, and we talked about, probably 4 years ago, the Winter Park train station, which is very similar to what we have here. And why don't we try to do something like that here at our doorstep? And we're spending all this money on Pennsylvania and New York and trying to refresh downtown. And, wouldn't it be great if there was some place you could have like a wedding and, then now we've got a refreshed hotel and now we've got, businesses and restaurants and catering, all those things. So we finally had the meeting. The city manager and myself met with the VFW, what's his title? Commander. Friday, and we were just talking about like opportunities to try to work together and cross-pollination between us and them and kind of mending some fences too. I guess there's a lot of old hard feelings against the city. We heard some of the stories that were when I was in elementary school, so I don't know. I was like, I'll have to take your word for it. So one of the things we talked about was that, they have that historic building, which has a great look to it. And then the other building is just kind of, like concrete block. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we could, try to help each other out? And, we're going to redo this building and refresh this. It's, right at our doorstep. So the city manager and myself talked about, is there a way that we could reach out to Song, who's the architect that's doing this, and ask them to just do some high-level sketches of what that area could look like and how we could have the two buildings kind of work together, the historic part and the newer part, and just, give them some ideas and kind of help them potentially go after grant opportunities or, do things like that. I know they are renovating that second building actually right now. The inside of it, they're replacing the floor, replacing the ceiling, taking their paneling on the wall, they're taking the paneling down, they're repainting. They're doing a lot of work to the inside, and we were like, wouldn't it be great if we could do something? In my mind, I kind of think even make that second building kind of look like the historic building. Give it the same shape roof, give it the same architectural details so they kind of speak to each other. But I'm not an architect, so we had kind of talked about, would council be interested in, giving like a $10,000 or $15,000 contract to Song. the city manager has the funding in a couple different places he could use, to just give some sketches, high-level plans, ideas for the VFW complex, and then helping them move along to try to get grant opportunities and things like that. So I was just seeing if there was any interest in doing that, or if anyone had any objections or thoughts on it.
Is that building considered a privately owned
Yes.
building, I assume? It's not, correct?
I don't know who owns it. It's not city ownership.
It's VFW. It's a not-for-profit.
Yeah, but it's.
A not-for-profit.
But it's owned by a private entity, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
My suggestion is to give them one of the grants to do that.
Mayor?
We can look into options about it.
Mayor?
Councilmember Trace?
I like the idea, and I think it's perfect. I think that is a program that would be great for the CRA.
It
Why
won't
can't-
work.
Why can't?
The purpose of the CRA is to increase the tax base, and since it's a nonprofit 501c3.
I said the same thing.
We had that.
I
mean,
said
that-
the same
that's
thing.
like-
I just
was
took my
like,
CRA training. so-
Yeah, because that'd be a great, well,
But we have our grant program too, and there's some funds available in that, so we'd be giving a nonprofit a grant to do that, and then help them, identify, we can help them, hook them up with
I
one of our
just feel like
architect firms.
it's an opportunity to, it would enhance, it's, not just their business, but it would provide an opportunity to have, a great space for meetings, weddings, things like that. We don't have good spaces around here. Like if you wanted to have a party or, you wanted to do something, there's not a lot of opportunities for that. And I just think how successful, I'm sure everyone here has been to Winter Park, to the farmer's market, the train station, the wedding venues there. I'm sure the mayor's been there for that. Just think,
Done weddings there.
what's,
Councilmember Askew?
what's that?
So not necessarily is it true. The VFW pays two separate property tax. It's all combined together, but that separate building actually pays property tax. I just know this because I questioned some other nonprofits before, and the American Legion does the same thing. They own the little detailing shop there. They actually pay the property tax on that as well. So they are paying property tax on that building. But if we start partnering with them and that becomes a wedding pavilion and then they move over to that building, then it will become, there will be no property tax on it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the intent for this building is in the complex over there, but it is probably ripe for some sort of discussion regarding a public-private partnership. What we are all seeing right now, especially in downtown areas like this, is the absolute parking need. And you see a lot of these opportunities where municipalities are partnering with entities that own property to work on it. So it would seem to me to be ripe. I don't know what's available on that site, but the city could enter into an agreement with them that says, hey, let us have access to your parking when you're not using it. We'll help you redesign your thing. So now we've got we've got an agreement as to what we're doing to address it, and it might provide some immediate relief for the city that you need on occasion. So, again, those are the kind of private partnerships you're starting to see, where you have these constrained areas and where there's properties that are owned by private property, but the entity, the city, needs access to it for certain reasons.
I'm not sure they have really excess parking though, because it's pretty jam up.
Busy.
It's pretty jam up, but
And they want their parking when they come, they want to be able to use it.
Well,
Sure.
not only that, so.
But anything we could do to enhance our relationship with them, I would certainly be in favor of that.
Well-
Anything that would enhance the look of the appearance downtown would be a winner.
I guess
for
my
us.
overall point is that if that's something the council wants to do, we certainly can figure out a way to construe it, either, as Mr. Sturgeon said, through your regular grant program. It is arguably even though it's not, it may not be CRA eligible, but it provides a public purpose with regard to the advancement and development of the downtown area. So you can find a lot of ways to show the public benefit to working with this private property owner to maybe come to something in the future that might benefit everybody.
yeah, I would love it. I just think
So-
it's
so if they
just
pay
like a
property
gem
tax, they start-
that we've got right here, and it's, see the little help.
You need like 3 people? I think we're all for it.
I think everybody's,
Yeah.
do you have direction?
Yes, yeah, we'll take a look at it and come back.
Okay.
Good. Anything
it.
else?
No, that's it.
Anything else? Nope. Are we done? Or you have anything else
That's
for
it.
us?
I have nothing else
Ms.
other than
Harris?
I am out tomorrow. I'm going to my son's reveal party for my seventh grandchild. So we'll find out what the gender is going to be Saturday.
That ought to be fun. Congratulations.
All right.
Look forward to hearing what the results are.
Hopefully I have video.
Are you hitting a golf ball or something?
Nope.
Are they letting you do it?
No, I'll tell you, my, not to take more of your time, but my son's an aircraft mechanic. He works on crop dusters. They're gonna fly a crop duster and then drop either blue water or pink water based on the gender.
That's awesome.
Hopefully it's not too windy.
As long as it's not windy or cloudy. I saw the weather's bad, but we'll get it done somehow.
All right.
That's awesome.
With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, it just hit me about that if there were a venue.